The morning sun rose slow over the wide plains, brushing the ridges with gold. Dust shimmered in the light, and the wind rolled soft through the dry grass. Eli Turner rode his bay horse along the canyon trail, the reins loose in his calloused hand. He had been riding since dawn, not toward anywhere in particular, just away from the silence that had filled his life too long. The only sounds were the steady creak of saddle leather and the hollow clop of hooves against hard ground. Eli had learned to love the quiet, though sometimes it felt too heavy. It was the kind of quiet that carried memories, of laughter, of home, of people long gone. Years had passed since he'd left his small riverside town, chasing work across the territories. He told himself he was fine with the solitude, that it was easier this way. But sometimes, when the wind shifted just right, he swore he could hear echoes of the past. The faint sound of a girl's laughter beneath the willow trees, the warmth of a summer evening when everything still felt possible. He adjusted his hat and tried to push the thought aside. The world didn't stop for nostalgia. Not out here. Then from somewhere ahead came a sharp, unmistakable crack. One shot, then another. Gunfire. Eli straightened in the saddle, all calm slipping away. His horse tensed beneath him. He turned his head toward the sound. 3 quick shots, echoing off the canyon walls, followed by a faint, desperate shout. Stagecoach, he thought, in trouble. He kicked his heels lightly, urging the horse forward. The animal leapt into a gallop, the dry air slicing past Eli's face. The trail twisted, then opened into a dusty pass bordered by scrub and rock. And there it was, a stagecoach, tilted on a broken wheel, its driver crouched behind the side railing, firing a pistol toward a ridge. Bandits, 4 of them, circling like vultures, firing at the coach and shouting curses. Eli didn't think. He never did when it came to danger. He drew his rifle from the scabbard and pulled his horse to a stop behind a cluster of rocks. He took aim at the nearest rider, a lanky man with a red scarf and a cruel grin, and squeezed the trigger. The man dropped from his saddle before his gun even hit the ground. The others turned fast, startled by the sudden shot from the canyon's edge. One tried to circle around, but Eli fired again, the shot striking the man's arm and spinning him from his horse. Chaos broke loose. The last 2 bandits exchanged panicked shouts, returning fire toward the rocks. Bullets kicked up dust near Eli's boots, but he stayed calm, reloaded, and fired once more. Another fell. The 4th, realizing the fight was lost, yanked his horse around and spurred it toward the open plains, disappearing in a storm of dust. Silence fell, thick and still. The echo of the last gunshot faded down the canyon. The driver peeked over the edge of the coach, pale but breathing, pistol still in hand. Eli stood, slinging his rifle over his shoulder, and walked toward the wrecked stage. His boots crunched over gravel, the smell of gunpowder sharp in the air. "You're safe now," he called. The driver nodded, trembling, wiping sweat from his brow. "Thought we were done for. They came out of nowhere. Never seen such boldness this close to Willow Creek." Eli glanced at the fallen men, scattered in the dust. "They won't bother you again." The driver managed a weak laugh of relief, then turned toward the coach. "Passengers are shaken, but no one's hurt, thank the Lord." The door creaked open and a woman's voice drifted out, soft, unsteady. "Is it over?" Eli froze. That voice, it was faint, trembling, but something in it struck him deep. He took a step closer. The woman leaned out, one hand gripping the doorframe, her bonnet slightly askew, a few loose curls of chestnut hair framing her face. Her eyes, wide and uncertain, met his, and in an instant, time folded back 10 years. "Clara?" he whispered. She blinked, disbelief flickering across her face, then a sudden widening of her eyes. "Eli Turner?" Neither moved for a moment. The noise of the plains seemed to fade entirely, leaving only the wind between them. Eli hadn't seen her since they were 16, since that summer by the river when she told him her family was moving east. She had been the only person who could make him laugh when life was hard, the only one who ever saw through his quietness. And now here she was, standing before him, a grown woman with the same gentle eyes he'd never forgotten. Clara stepped out of the coach, her gloved hands trembling slightly. Dust clung to her dress. She looked around at the chaos, the overturned wheel, the scattered supplies, and then back at him. "You saved us." Her voice wavered between shock and relief. "I guess I did," he said softly. He couldn't bring himself to look away. The driver began to gather the horses, muttering about repairs. Eli stepped aside, giving Clara room. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The air between them was thick with all the unspoken years. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," she said finally. "Neither did I." He smiled faintly, though there was sadness behind it. "You look different, grown." Her lips curved in a small, wistful smile. "So do you." The moment hung there, fragile and full of everything that had been lost. The driver called out, "Wheels cracked clean through. We won't be moving far till we fix it. Closest town's Willow Creek, maybe 5 miles." Eli nodded. "I'll ride with you. Make sure you get there safe." Clara looked at him, a flicker of gratitude softening her eyes. "You don't have to. You've already done enough." He adjusted his hat, glancing at the horizon. "Ain't about have to." She understood what he meant, even if he didn't say more. Together, they began helping the passengers gather what they could from the wreck. A family of 3, husband, wife, and a small boy, climbed out, pale and shaken. Eli calmed the horses, his touch gentle, his words few but steady. Clara watched him, noticing how time had shaped him. Broader shoulders, tanned skin, eyes that had seen too much and still managed kindness. When the boy began to cry, frightened by the still bodies of the fallen bandits, Eli knelt down and placed a comforting hand on the child's shoulder. "They can't hurt anyone now," he said softly. Clara felt something stir in her chest at the tenderness in his tone. The years had made him stronger, but the gentle soul she once knew was still there. By noon, they had the coach propped up enough to move slowly. Eli rode alongside, scanning the ridges for any sign of danger. Clara sat near the window, her gaze drifting toward him now and then. Each time she looked, she found him looking back. Neither spoke, but each shared the same quiet wonder that fate had brought them together again, in the middle of nowhere. As the sun climbed higher, heat shimmered on the horizon. The driver wiped sweat from his brow, muttering about the long road ahead. Clara took a sip from her canteen, her hands still trembling slightly from the morning's fear. Eli rode closer to the window. "You all right in there?" She nodded. "I think so. Just shaken." He gave a small nod. "You were always braver than you thought." That made her smile. Just a flicker, but real. "You still remember that?" He chuckled softly. "Hard to forget the girl who tried to climb the tallest tree in town just to prove a point." Clara laughed, the sound light and familiar. "And fell right into the creek. You blamed me for that. You dared me." Their laughter faded into a warm silence. For a moment, the years seemed to melt away, and they were children again, laughing under the summer sky. As the afternoon wore on, Clara found herself remembering things she hadn't thought of in years. The letters she meant to send him but never did. The way she'd cried the day she left. The promise she whispered that maybe someday they'd meet again. And now here he was, dusty, weathered, real. By late day, the coach creaked and groaned along the trail, the wheel threatening to give again. Eli dismounted and walked beside it, his hand occasionally brushing the side as if steadying the whole world. Clara leaned out the window watching him. "Eli," she called softly. He looked up. "Yeah? I never thanked you properly." "For saving us." He shook his head. "You don't owe me thanks." "I do," she insisted. "If you hadn't come when you did." He met her gaze, his expression gentle. "Then someone else would have. But I'm glad it was me." Something in his voice, quiet, sincere, made her heart ache. She wanted to ask where he'd been all these years, why he never wrote, whether he'd thought of her too. But the words caught in her throat. It wasn't the time. They reached a stretch of land where the plains opened wide, the sun lowering into streaks of orange and gold. The driver decided to stop for the night before the wheel gave completely. Eli helped unhitch the horses and made a small fire while the passengers settled nearby. The air cooled quickly as dusk fell. Clara sat on a fallen log, her hands folded in her lap, watching the flames dance. The shadows played across Eli's face as he worked quietly, his movements sure and unhurried. He offered her a cup of coffee, the tin warm against her fingers. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded, sitting a short distance away. For a while they watched the fire in silence, listening to the distant call of night birds and the soft rustle of the wind. "It feels strange," she said after a long pause, "seeing you here. Like no time has passed, but also like everything has." "Yeah," he murmured, "life's funny that way." "I used to wonder where you went," she admitted. "After I left town, I thought you might have followed, or maybe written. I didn't know you'd gone this far west." "I went where work was," he said quietly. "Didn't have much reason to stay anywhere." Her gaze softened. "And now?" He looked toward the horizon, where the last bit of sunlight lingered. "Now, I don't know." The simplicity of his words carried a kind of truth that touched her deeply. Night settled around them, wrapping the camp in quiet. The others drifted to sleep, but Eli and Clara stayed by the dying fire, their faces lit by its faint glow. She looked at him through the smoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever think about the past?" He gave a slow nod. "More than I'd like to admit." "So do I." Their eyes met across the firelight, and for a moment, the years of distance disappeared. The bond they'd once shared, innocent, unspoken, felt alive again, waiting for the courage to be named. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain. Eli stood, adding another log to the fire. "Get some rest. We'll head to Willow Creek come morning." She nodded, her gaze following him. "Good night, Eli." He turned, tipping his hat slightly. "Good night, Clara." When he walked away to check the horses, she watched him through the dark, her heart full of a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this meeting wasn't just coincidence. Fate, it seemed, had a way of bringing old souls back together just when they needed it most. And as the fire crackled low and the plains stretched silent beneath the stars, Eli Turner stood under the wide western sky, unaware that his life had just changed forever. Morning came with a soft golden haze stretching across the horizon. The sky above the plains glowed faintly pink, the air cool before the heat of the day. Eli Turner stirred the dying embers of the campfire with the edge of his boot, watching the smoke rise and twist into the waking sky. Around him, the world felt quiet again. Too quiet, except for the faint creak of the stagecoach as it settled on its cracked wheel. He glanced toward the sleeping figures by the wagon. The passengers were bundled beneath blankets, the small family huddled together for warmth. Clara was sitting a little apart from them, already awake, her bonnet resting beside her, the wind teasing strands of chestnut hair across her face. She looked peaceful, almost like a memory he'd dreamt once and never quite forgotten. Eli walked over, his boots crunching softly against the dirt. "You didn't sleep," he said. She smiled faintly. "Neither did you." He shrugged. "Old habits." Clara turned her face toward the sunrise, her eyes tracing the horizon. "It's beautiful out here. Empty, but beautiful." "Empty's not always bad," Eli replied. "Sometimes it's the only way a man can hear himself think." She studied him for a moment. "You've always liked the quiet." He gave a small, knowing smile. "Guess I still do." For a while they sat in companionable silence, the kind that didn't need words. The wind moved through the tall grass, carrying with it the scent of sage and dust. Then the driver called out that it was time to move, and the spell broke. Eli helped load the passengers, tightening the harness straps and checking the damaged wheel. It would hold, at least until Willow Creek. When the stage began to roll again, Clara sat by the window, and Eli rode beside it, his horse keeping a steady pace. Every now and then she'd glance out, and their eyes would meet, small, stolen moments that neither tried to explain. Hours passed beneath the rising sun. The land stretched endlessly around them, wide and golden, dotted with mesquite and the occasional tumbleweed skittering across the trail. The rhythmic creak of the coach wheels and the soft thud of hooves became a steady heartbeat in the air. By midday, they stopped to rest the horses at a shallow creek that wound through a patch of cottonwoods. Eli filled the canteens while the others stretched their legs. Clara stepped out, smoothing her skirts and looking around at the quiet water. It glimmered in the sunlight, a rare kindness in the dry country. "I almost forgot how clear water can look out here," she said softly. Eli handed her a filled canteen. "You've been away a long time. 10 years. She smiled faintly, but there was sadness beneath it. "Feels like a lifetime. I used to think I'd never miss this place. Now I realize I've been missing it every day." He watched her reflection ripple in the creek. "What brought you back?" She hesitated before answering. "I wanted to start over. After my parents passed, I stayed east for a while, teaching at a small school. But it never felt like home. I guess I thought if I came west again, maybe I'd find something that felt familiar." Eli nodded. "You will. Willow Creek's quiet, folks are kind. You'll fit right in." Clara knelt by the water, cupping it in her hands. "And you? What's kept you out here all this time?" He looked away toward the horizon, his voice low. "Work. The land. Maybe running from ghosts I didn't want to face." She glanced up at him, her expression soft. "Ghosts like me?" He met her gaze and smiled faintly. "No, you were the part one kept hoping I'd run into again." Her heart skipped, the words settling between them like something fragile and true. She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing at all. After the brief rest, they continued the journey. The road wound upward into the ridge country, where wind carved strange shapes into the rock and hawks circled in the blue above. The passengers dozed in the afternoon warmth. But Clara couldn't sleep. Her thoughts kept circling back to the boy she'd once known, the one who'd carved her initials into the old barn door and promised he'd never forget her. Eli rode slightly ahead now, his posture straight, the sun glinting off his hat brim. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned to survive the hard way. Watching him stirred something in her chest, a sense of safety, a familiarity, and a longing she couldn't quite name. As the sun dipped lower, they reached another stretch of rough terrain. The wheel, already weakened, splintered again on a rut. The coach lurched sharply to one side, throwing the passengers into alarm. Eli dismounted instantly, rushing to the side. "Everyone all right?" he called. The driver cursed under his breath. "Wheel's gone clean this time. We'll need to patch it before dark." Clara stepped down carefully, brushing dust from her skirt. "Can we fix it here?" Eli knelt by the broken wheel, inspecting the damage. "We can make it hold for another few miles if we brace it." The driver fetched a hammer and some rope from the luggage box. Together they worked quickly, the air thick with the dry scent of earth and sweat. Clara offered to help, holding the lantern steady as Eli tied the makeshift brace in place. Her hand brushed his once, and for a moment neither moved. He looked up at her, the lamplight soft against his face. "You always were stubborn about helping." She smiled faintly. "You always said I was too proud to stand still. I still think that." They shared a quiet laugh that eased the tension. When the repairs were done, the driver wiped his brow and muttered something about reaching the next rest stop before nightfall. As they started again, the sky deepened into amber, the horizon painted in fire. Shadows stretched long across the plains. Clara leaned out the window, watching the light fade, feeling the world slow around her. She could hear Eli's horse beside the coach, the steady rhythm of its hooves keeping time with her heartbeat. When dusk finally settled, the driver called for another stop. They made camp near a cluster of low pines. The air was cooler here, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Clara helped the other passengers settle, then wandered toward where Eli was tending the horses. He was checking the hooves, murmuring quietly to the animals as he brushed the dust from their coats. She stood a few paces away, watching the calm in his movements. It struck her how different he seemed from the boy she'd known, harder, steadier, but his gentleness hadn't faded. "You've changed," she said softly. He looked up, smiling. "You mean I got older?" "No," she said, stepping closer. "You got quieter. But I can still see him, the boy who used to whistle when he was nervous. Eli chuckled under his breath. Guess I've learned to keep the noise inside. Clara tilted her head. That sounds lonely, he shrugged. Sometimes, but out here, quiet keeps you alive. She looked at him for a long moment. Then maybe it's time you remembered how to talk again. He met her gaze, something unspoken flickering there, half amusement, half tenderness. You offering to teach me? I am a teacher, she teased. Their laughter softened the night. Later, as the fire burned low, the other passengers drifted off to sleep. The stars spread wide overhead, endless and bright. Clara sat by the flames, warming her hands while Eli sat across from her, his hat resting beside him. You ever miss it? She asked quietly. Home, I mean. He thought for a moment. Sometimes. But the thing I missed most about home was a person, not a place. Clara's eyes lifted to his. The fire crackled softly between them, throwing light across his face. She felt her chest tighten, memories flooding back. Their last day together by the river, the promise he'd never quite spoken. I thought about you, she whispered, more than I should have. Eli's voice was low, steady. Then we were both guilty. Silence fell again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Warm, alive, filled with all the things neither of them dared to say. A breeze swept through the camp, carrying the faint scent of rain. Clara shivered slightly, pulling her shawl tighter. Eli stood, stepped over, and offered his coat without a word. You'll be cold, she said. I'll be fine, he replied. When she took it, their hands brushed again, and this time neither pulled away. Her fingers lingered against his for just a heartbeat longer than needed. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded. Get some rest. Tomorrow'll be long. She watched him walk away into the shadows, checking the perimeter, making sure the fire was safe. Something in her heart stirred, a quiet certainty that this man, this version of Eli, was someone she could trust without question. When she finally lay down beneath the stars, she could still hear him moving nearby, the sound of his boots soft against the earth. It was enough to make her feel safe, the kind of safety she hadn't felt in years. She closed her eyes, and the night carried her gently into dreams of willow trees and river banks, of laughter that once belonged to another lifetime. But Eli didn't sleep. He sat by the fire long after everyone else had drifted into slumber. The stars above him seemed endless, cold, and far away. He looked toward the stagecoach, where Clara slept beneath his coat, her breathing slow and steady. He remembered the girl she had been, the way she'd run barefoot through the grass, the way she'd looked back at him from the wagon the day she left, waving until the dust swallowed her whole. 10 years of silence hadn't erased that image. He took a slow breath, rubbing a hand across his jaw. He'd faced gunfire, hunger, loneliness, but nothing had shaken him quite like seeing her step out of that coach. It felt like the universe had turned a circle he didn't know was still spinning. As the fire dimmed to embers, he leaned back against the wagon wheel, eyes heavy but heart restless. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe she'd go on to her new life, and he'd return to his endless road. But a small, stubborn part of him, a part he thought he'd buried long ago, wanted to believe that this time, maybe the road had led him exactly where he was meant to be. And somewhere in the darkness, as dawn waited just beyond the horizon, Eli Turner whispered a silent promise to the night that he wouldn't let this second chance slip away so easily. The morning broke gray and restless, the wind already tugging at the edges of the sky as if warning that the day would not stay calm for long. The travelers rose slowly, the air cool enough to see their breath. Eli Turner was already awake, tightening the saddle cinch and checking the horses. His movements were quiet and methodical, but his eyes kept drifting toward Clara, who stood by the creek washing her hands in the cold water. The sun had yet to pierce through the gathering clouds, and everything felt heavy with the weight of something waiting to happen. The repaired wheel groaned as the driver hitched the stagecoach once more. The road ahead wound through the low ridges of stone and brush that led toward Willow Creek. It would be a day's ride if all went well, but the sky above said otherwise. A bank of dark clouds loomed far off in the west, rolling like smoke, and the wind carried the low hum of thunder. Clara looked up at the shifting horizon, a hand resting over her heart. "It's going to rain," she murmured. Eli followed her gaze. "Maybe worse than rain," he said softly. The passengers climbed aboard, anxious to move before the weather broke. Clara settled into her seat near the window, but her eyes followed Eli as he mounted his horse and took his place beside the coach. He gave her a reassuring nod before the driver snapped the reins, setting them into motion. The trail grew narrower, twisting through rocky hills where the wind whistled between the ridges. The smell of ozone filled the air. A hawk circled high above, its cry swallowed by the growing roar of wind. Inside the coach, the small boy clung to his mother's arm, frightened by the rattling sound the wheels made against the stones. Clara reached over and spoke gently to him, her voice soft and steady, easing his fear. She had always been good with children, calm, patient, full of quiet warmth. Eli noticed through the window, a faint smile crossing his lips before he turned his eyes back to the horizon. By midday, the light had dimmed to a strange, golden gray. The storm was chasing them now, its shadow stretching long across the plains. The air felt charged, heavy with electricity, the first drops of rain falling thick and cold. The driver shouted to keep the pace steady, urging the horses harder as thunder cracked in the distance. Eli rode close, his coat darkening with the first wave of rain. He could feel the power in the storm building, the kind that came fast and wild across the open country. Lightning flashed against the darkening sky, splitting it wide for a heartbeat before the thunder followed like a cannon's roar. The wind howled, driving dust and rain sideways. Clara pressed her hand against the window pane, her breath fogging the glass. She could see Eli's silhouette through the downpour, steady and unflinching, every muscle in motion as he fought to keep the horses calm. Her heart tightened. Then, without warning, the road curved into a steep incline, slick with mud. The stagecoach jolted hard, one wheel catching on a buried rock. The driver shouted as the horses reared, frightened by the thunder. The entire carriage tilted dangerously to one side. Clara gasped as her body lurched, grabbing hold of the window frame. Eli saw it happen before he heard the scream. He spurred his horse forward, leaping down as the coach skidded sideways. Mud splashed around him as he reached for the bridle, grabbing the lead horse by the reins and pulling hard. "Whoa! Easy now!" His voice cut through the wind, deep and commanding. The horses fought him, panicked, but Eli held fast, muscles straining as the driver worked to steady the brake. For a tense moment, the world seemed to hang in balance, wood creaking, hooves pounding, rain slashing down in sheets. Then the wheel caught again, the weight of the coach settling upright with a deep groan. The danger passed, but the silence that followed felt sharp as a blade. Eli looked up, soaked through, chest heaving. The driver swore under his breath, too shaken to speak. Clara pushed open the door, stepping out into the rain before anyone could stop her. "Eli!" she called, her skirt heavy with water, her voice half lost to the storm. He turned toward her, his hair plastered to his forehead, rain streaming down his face. "You shouldn't be out here," he shouted over the wind. "I couldn't just sit there," she cried back. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, a tired smile breaking through. "Takes more than a little storm to hurt me." She moved closer, the rain beating against both of them. He reached out instinctively, his hand catching her arm as the ground beneath them turned slick. For a brief moment they were inches apart, breathing hard, faces wet with rain and fear and something deeper. The world around them blurred, the thunder, the wind, the cold, all fading until it was only the two of them in that wild space between danger and safety. Then lightning flashed again, so close that the ground trembled beneath their feet. The driver shouted, "We need shelter! There's an old barn ahead, less than a mile." Eli looked at Clara and nodded. "Back in the coach, I'll lead the way." She hesitated, searching his eyes, then obeyed, climbing inside as he swung back onto his horse. The rain came harder now, turning the trail into a river of mud. Every flash of lightning lit the world in harsh silver. Eli rode ahead, guiding them toward the shape he remembered. A weathered barn, half collapsed but standing, tucked near a bend of rock. When they finally reached it, the driver maneuvered the stage beside the entrance. The passengers rushed inside, shivering and soaked, grateful for even a sliver of dry ground. Eli dismounted and helped Clara down, his hands steady at her waist as he lifted her from the step. Her breath caught when she looked at him, close enough to see the rain running down his cheekbones, the faint scar near his jaw she hadn't noticed before. Inside, the air was damp and smelled of old wood and hay. The roof leaked in places, but it was shelter enough. Eli built a small fire from dry scraps of timber he found near the back, the flames catching with a sputtering hiss. The warmth spread slowly through the dark barn, flickering over the rough beams. Clara sat near the fire, rubbing her chilled hands together. Her clothes clung to her, every thread soaked through. Eli shrugged off his coat and draped it over her shoulders without a word. She looked up at him, her eyes soft in the firelight. "You'll freeze," she said quietly. "I'm used to it," he replied. "You're not." He crouched beside the fire, his expression thoughtful as the flames reflected in his eyes. The others huddled nearby, whispering softly, but soon drifted into uneasy rest, leaving the two of them in their own small world of light and shadow. Outside, the storm raged, wind howling through the cracks of the barn. Rain drummed against the roof, a wild rhythm that filled the silence between their breaths. Clara watched him as he stared into the fire, the golden light tracing the lines of his face, the curve of his mouth. There was something about the quiet strength in him that made her chest ache. "Eli," she said softly. He looked up. "Yeah? Do you ever wonder why things happen the way they do?" He gave a slow shrug. "Used to. Not so much anymore." "I can't help thinking there's a reason," she said. "That maybe some roads aren't accidents." His gaze lingered on her. "You think this one was meant to be?" She held his eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the firelight, placing another piece of wood on the flames. The crackle filled the space between them. "I don't know what I believe anymore," he said quietly, "but I do know I never stopped remembering you." Her breath caught, the words hanging in the air like smoke. "You mean that?" He nodded, eyes steady. "There were nights out on the trail when I'd see a sunset, or hear a song from town, and I'd think of you. I didn't know if you'd remember me, but I hoped you were somewhere safe." Clara swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "I tried to forget. I told myself it was childish, the way we promised things we couldn't keep. But when I saw you yesterday, it was like all those years disappeared." Eli's expression softened. "Guess neither of us did too good at forgetting." For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind howled outside, and lightning lit the barn in a burst of white. But inside the fire burned low and warm, wrapping them in a fragile kind of peace. Clara shifted closer, her hands still trembling slightly. "You could have died today," she whispered. He looked at her, half smiling. "Wouldn't be the first time someone tried to see to that." "I mean it," she said, voice breaking slightly. "When that coach almost went over, I thought—" She stopped, pressing a hand to her chest. "I thought I'd lost you again." Eli leaned forward, his voice barely above a breath. "You won't lose me again." The words sank into the quiet between them, firm and certain. Outside, the thunder rolled farther away, the storm beginning to ease. The rain softened to a steady whisper on the roof. Clara looked down, blinking back tears she hadn't realized were there. Eli reached out, his fingers brushing hers gently. For a heartbeat, everything stilled. She didn't pull away. Their hands rested together, warm in the glow of the fire. The world narrowed to that one small connection. "I don't know what happens next," he said softly, "but I know I don't want to keep running from what's right in front of me." She met his eyes, her voice shaking. "And what's in front of you now?" He smiled faintly. "You." The storm outside faded to silence, leaving only the sound of their breathing and the soft pop of the fire. In that moment, nothing else mattered. No distance, no years, no fear. Just two souls who had found each other again in the middle of nowhere. Later, when the others stirred and the rain had slowed to a mist, Eli leaned back against the wall, exhaustion settling into his bones. Clara rested beside him, wrapped in his coat, her head drifting to his shoulder as sleep claimed her. He didn't move, afraid the moment might vanish if he did. He watched the fire burn low, his heart steady for the first time in years. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered, the reminder that sometimes the fiercest tempests lead not to ruin, but to shelter. And as dawn's pale light began to creep through the cracks in the barn, Eli Turner looked down at the woman asleep beside him and knew, without a doubt, that the long, empty roads of his life had finally brought him home. Morning came quietly after the storm, the kind of quiet that feels earned. Mist hung over the plains, rising from the damp earth like breath. The old barn stood silver in the pale light, its roof dripping steady drops that sparkled when the sun finally broke through the clouds. Eli Turner stirred first, blinking at the warmth pressed against his shoulder. Clara slept beside him, his coat still wrapped around her, her hand resting near his heart. For a moment he didn't move. He just watched her breathe, her face soft in the dawn. When she opened her eyes, she looked disoriented, then smiled faintly. "We made it through the night," she whispered. Eli's voice was low. "You doubted we would?" "Not really," she said, "but it feels good to be sure." Outside, the driver called for everyone to pack up. The air smelled of wet sage and new beginnings. Clara stood and smoothed her skirt, her hair falling loose from its pins. Eli gathered his saddle, helping the others ready the horses. When she turned to him, her smile was different, calmer, knowing as if the storm had taken more than fear with it. They left the barn behind, following the trail now soft with mud. The world had changed overnight. The dust that had once coated the earth was gone, replaced by the rich scent of rain-soaked soil. The sky stretched vast and blue above them, streaked with the last traces of silver cloud. Eli rode alongside the coach again, but this time Clara leaned out of the window more often, her eyes following him. She wasn't sure what had changed, only that the silence between them felt warmer now, like a promise instead of a distance. By midday, the first rooftops of Willow Creek appeared beyond a rise of hills. The town was small but lively, framed by rolling pasture and the faint shimmer of a river beyond. Whitewashed buildings lined a single main street, with a small church steeple at the far end, and the sound of a blacksmith's hammer echoing faintly through the air. Children ran barefoot along the boardwalk, chasing a dog that barked as the stagecoach rolled in. The driver let out a relieved laugh. "Home stretch, folks." Eli slowed his horse as the stage came to a stop in front of the general store. Townsfolk gathered, curious about the mud-splattered coach and its weary passengers. Clara stepped down with Eli's hand steadying her. She blinked at the sight of the town, simple, quiet, full of life in a way she hadn't seen in years. "Is this where you're staying?" Eli asked. She nodded. "The schoolhouse just beyond the church. They offered me a room beside it. It's small, but it's mine." He smiled. "Sounds perfect." For a moment, neither moved. People passed around them, unloading bags, talking, laughing, but Eli and Clara stood still, in the middle of it all. Then, a woman approached, middle-aged, friendly, her apron dusted with flour. "You must be Miss Whitmore," she said brightly. "We've been expecting you." "I'm Mrs. Talbot from the board. Welcome to Willow Creek." Clara smiled warmly. "Thank you. I'm glad to finally be here." "We'll get you settled," Mrs. Talbot continued. "The children have been asking when their new teacher would arrive. You'll find them quite spirited, but good-hearted." Clara laughed softly. "I look forward to meeting them." Eli helped carry her luggage to a small wagon, his hands brushing hers briefly. "You need anything, you send word," he said quietly. "I will," she replied. "But you'll stay for a while, won't you?" He hesitated, glancing toward the distant hills. "Wasn't planning to, but maybe I ought to." "Maybe you should," she said, her eyes steady on his. He tipped his hat slightly, and she smiled. Then Mrs. Talbot ushered her toward the schoolhouse wagon, calling back cheerful instructions. Eli watched until the wagon disappeared down the street. The town felt different with her in it, brighter somehow, like color seeping into a faded painting. He found work easily enough, helping a rancher on the edge of town mend fences and break new horses. It wasn't much, but it gave him reason to stay. Every few days he'd ride into town to pick up supplies, and somehow he always ended up near the schoolhouse. Clara settled quickly into her new life. She painted the walls of the classroom, swept the floors, and arranged the small desks in tidy rows. The children adored her. She had a way of turning every lesson into a story. At noon, she'd open the windows to let in the breeze, and the sound of her voice carried down the street. Sometimes Eli would pass by on horseback, slowing to listen without meaning to. One afternoon, as he leaned by the fence near the schoolyard, she spotted him through the window. The class had just ended, and the children were rushing home with laughter spilling into the street. She stepped outside, brushing chalk dust from her hands. "You're lingering again," she teased. He grinned. "Maybe I'm just admiring fine craftsmanship. You've turned that old building into something special." She crossed her arms, smirking. "And maybe you're just looking for an excuse to talk." "Maybe I am." They fell into easy conversation. She told him about her students, how one of them kept hiding frogs in her desk, how another drew stars instead of doing arithmetic. He told her about the ranch work, the long days and stubborn horses. Their laughter flowed effortlessly, like it used to when they were young. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and rose, he walked her home to the small room beside the schoolhouse. A lantern flickered by the door, and she paused there, turning to him. "Thank you, Eli, for everything," she said softly. He tilted his head. "For what? For staying?" He didn't answer, only smiled. But the warmth in his eyes said more than words could. Days passed into weeks. The rhythm of life in Willow Creek settled around them like a familiar song. They saw each other often, at the general store, at Sunday gatherings, or simply in passing along the road. Every encounter left behind a quiet trace, a look, a smile that lingered too long. One Saturday, the town held its harvest fair. Stalls lined the main street with pies, preserves, and ribbons fluttering in the breeze. Music drifted from the saloon, mingling with laughter and the scent of roasted corn. Clara wore a pale blue dress and a ribbon in her hair, the color making her eyes shine. Eli saw her before she saw him, standing near the apple stand, her smile easy and bright. He hesitated before walking over. "Didn't think I'd see you here," he said. "I didn't think I'd see you smile," she replied with a laugh. "Guess we're both full of surprises." Mrs. Talbot spotted them and dragged Clara into a group near the musicians. The fiddlers struck up a lively tune, and couples began to dance in the street. Clara turned to Eli, half teasing. "You still don't dance, do you?" He raised an eyebrow. "Who says I don't?" She folded her arms, challenging him. "Then prove it." Eli chuckled but stepped forward, offering his hand. "Reckon I might make a fool of myself. Then we'll be fools together." He took her hand, and they joined the swirl of dancers under the lantern light. The steps came awkwardly at first, but soon they found a rhythm, his steady strength guiding her, her laughter soft against the music. Around them, the world blurred into motion, colors and laughter, and the heartbeat of the fiddles. When the song slowed, he held her a little closer than he should have, their eyes meeting in the golden light. Time stretched thin between them, fragile and endless. After the dance, they walked away from the crowd, down toward the edge of town, where the noise faded into the sound of crickets. The river glimmered faintly in the distance, reflecting the stars. Clara stopped beneath a willow tree, her breath visible in the cool night air. "It feels like a dream," she said softly. "What does? This. You and me. After all these years." He leaned against the tree, watching her. "Feels real enough to me." She looked at him then, eyes full of something she couldn't hide. "Eli, do you ever wonder if maybe this was what was meant to happen all along? That all those years apart were just leading us back here?" He took a step closer, close enough to see the reflection of the lanterns fading in her eyes. "I've wondered it every day since that storm." For a long moment, neither moved. The night wrapped around them, still and quiet. He reached out, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her face. She didn't move away. "I don't want to rush anything," he said softly. "I just She stopped him with a smile. "You don't have to say it. I know." He nodded, his hand still resting lightly against her cheek. "Then you know I'm not going anywhere." She took his hand in hers, holding it against her heart. "Good," she whispered. "Because neither am I." The sound of laughter carried faintly from town, the music starting again in the distance. They stood together beneath the willow, the cool breeze rustling its leaves around them. It felt like the world had finally exhaled. That night, as Eli walked her home, neither spoke much. Words weren't needed. When they reached her porch, she turned and looked at him, her eyes soft in the lamplight. "Good night, Eli," she said, her voice warm. "Good night, Clara." He watched her go inside, the door closing gently behind her. Then he turned and walked slowly down the quiet street, his heart full but steady. The stars above were bright, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel the pull of the road calling him away. The next morning, when the sun rose over Willow Creek, it found the little town bathed in gold, the air cool and clean after the long, stormy weeks. The world felt new again. And for Eli Turner, who had spent so many years searching for something he couldn't name, it finally felt like peace. Weeks slipped quietly into months in Willow Creek. The memory of the storm faded into the rhythm of gentle days, the kind that started with golden lights spilling across the plains and ended in soft twilight over the hills. Eli Turner had found steady work at the McCready Ranch, mending fences and breaking colts, but most evenings found him in town. Sometimes it was an excuse to buy supplies, to deliver hay, to fix a loose board at the schoolhouse, but both of them knew the real reason. Clara Whitmore had turned the small school into the town's heart. Every morning, children's laughter spilled out through open windows, echoing down the road. She painted lessons across a chalkboard with grace and patience, her voice lilting like a hymn. And when the bell rang in the afternoon, she would often find Eli waiting just outside, his hat in hand, dust on his boots, and that quiet smile that always made her heart skip. It became a rhythm neither of them spoke aloud. He'd walk her home, sometimes in silence, sometimes sharing stories of the ranch, the stubborn horse that wouldn't take a saddle, the coyote that stole a chicken, the way the sky looked over the ridge at dusk. She'd listen, smiling, her eyes soft, her voice warm when she teased him for pretending not to care about the things he clearly did. One evening, as summer began to settle into the land, they sat on the small porch outside her room by the schoolhouse. Fireflies blinked lazily in the grass. The air smelled faintly of lilac and dust. Clara rocked gently in her chair while Eli leaned against the railing, his hat dangling from one hand. "You know," she said, glancing at him with a mischievous spark, "people are starting to talk." He raised an eyebrow. "That right? Mrs. Talbot says she's never seen a man visit a schoolteacher this often without reason." Eli grinned. "And what reason does she think I've got?" Clara tilted her head, her eyes glimmering in the lamplight. "She says you're sweet on me." He chuckled softly, looking down. "Guess she's smarter than most." The admission hung in the air, simple and true. Clara's breath caught, but she didn't look away. "Is that what you call it? Being sweet on someone?" Eli stepped closer, his voice low. "What would you call it?" Her heart fluttered. "I'd call it the thing I've been hoping you'd say." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full of everything they'd carried since the day he saved that stagecoach. Full of the years they'd lost and the time they'd found again. When Eli finally reached out, his fingers brushed her cheek as if afraid she might vanish. She leaned into his touch, eyes closing. He bent his head, and their lips met for the first time. Not hurried, not wild, just steady and sure, like a promise spoken in the language of the heart. The world outside the porch faded. The chirp of crickets, the whisper of the wind, the faint laughter from the saloon down the street. There was only this, the soft press of her lips, the steady thrum of his heartbeat beneath her hand. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his chest. "I waited a long time for this," she murmured. "So did I," he said. "Didn't know I was waiting, but I was." After that night, something shifted quietly between them. They didn't announce it, didn't need to. The town noticed on its own, the way she smiled brighter when he walked by, the way he lingered longer at the schoolhouse gate. Life went on, but it felt softer, warmer, as if the whole world had drawn a deep, contented breath. As summer deepened, the fields turned gold, and the days grew long and sweet. On Sundays, they'd ride out beyond the edge of town to the old riverbank, where the willows grew thick. There, the sound of running water filled the air, and the sunlight dappled through the branches. Sometimes they'd talk, sometimes they'd just sit, the silence between them comfortable. Clara would read aloud from a book, her voice gentle, while Eli whittled small pieces of wood into shapes, horses, birds, stars, things she kept on her windowsill. One afternoon, while the river shimmered beneath the bright sky, Clara set her book aside. "Do you ever think about leaving again?" she asked. Eli looked up from his carving. "Not anymore." "You used to." He nodded slowly. "For a long time, I thought the road was where I belonged. Moving from place to place made it easy not to miss anything. But now—" He glanced toward her, his gaze steady. "Now it feels like I found the place I was meant to stop." Her heart swelled at his words. "I'm glad." He smiled faintly. "You should know, I ain't much for fancy words or promises I can't keep, but I'll stay as long as you'll have me." Clara reached over, taking his hand. "Then you'll be here a long time, Eli Turner." The wind rustled through the willows, and he leaned in to kiss her again, the sun catching in her hair. It felt like peace, quiet, lasting peace, the kind neither of them had known before. But peace, as they'd both learned, never came without testing. A few weeks later, word spread that the McCready Ranch was selling part of its land. The foreman told Eli they might not need extra hands for much longer. He didn't say it to complain, only to warn Clara that things might change. But she saw something flicker behind his calm, an old fear, one she recognized. That night, they sat together on her porch again, the air thick with the smell of rain coming from far off. "You thinking of moving on?" she asked quietly. He hesitated. "I'm thinking about what comes next. Can't live off odd jobs forever." "You could build something here," she said, her voice steady. "You've got the hands for it, the heart for it." He looked at her, searching her face. "And if I start something here, you'd want to be part of that?" "I already am," she said softly. The way she said it, simple, unwavering, left no room for doubt. He reached for her hand, thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Then I'll stay." They sat like that for a long time, the first drops of rain beginning to fall, cool and gentle. The storm rolled closer, but neither moved. When the rain finally came down harder, Eli pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the sky opened above them. She laughed against his chest, and he laughed too, both of them soaked and smiling, their hearts full. By the time autumn came, the schoolhouse garden was blooming with marigolds and late roses. The children brought apples for their teacher, and Clara's classroom walls were lined with drawings. Eli had found steady work helping build new stables outside town, his strong hands shaping beams that would stand for decades. Every evening he came home to her, dust-covered but smiling. One crisp evening, after the children had gone and the sun had set behind the hills, he arrived carrying something wrapped in cloth. Clara was lighting the lamp when he walked in. "What's that?" she asked, curious. He set it on the table and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small wooden carving, two willows leaning together beside a river, their branches touching at the top. "It's us," he said, a little sheepish. "Or what we found." Clara touched the carving gently. "It's beautiful. I figured maybe we could have something of that place here. A reminder." Her eyes filled with tears, not from sadness, but from something deeper. She stepped forward, placing her hands on his chest. "You don't need to remind me, Eli. I carry it with me every day." He bent his head, his voice low against her hair. "You make it awful hard for a man to find the right words." "You already have," she whispered. That night, as the wind moved softly outside and the lamplight flickered across their faces, they finally let go of the last of the distance that had ever been between them. There were no grand declarations, no promises spoken into the dark, just two people who had wandered far enough to know that love, real love, didn't need to be loud to last. Winter followed with its quiet chill. Snow came to Willow Creek, blanketing the rooftops and the fields beyond. The schoolhouse fire burned bright, and the sound of children's laughter warmed the cold air. Eli built a small fence around the yard and hung a sign he'd carved himself, Whitmore School. Clara scolded him for the trouble, but her eyes shone with pride. When Christmas came, the townsfolk gathered in the church. Clara played the old piano, her fingers dancing across the keys, while Eli stood at the back watching her with quiet admiration. Later that night, as they walked home under the falling snow, she slipped her gloved hand into his. "It's strange," she said, looking up at the stars. "I used to think love had to be some grand adventure, something that swept you away. But now I see it's quieter than that." He smiled, snow gathering on his hat brim. "Yeah, it's more like coming home." Spring returned at last, soft and green. The hills bloomed, and the river ran full again. Eli planted a small patch of wildflowers beside the schoolhouse, just below her window. She said it was unnecessary. He said it was insurance, in case she ever forgot how beautiful her laughter was when she saw them bloom. On the first warm evening of the season, they sat together on the porch once more. The air was alive with the hum of crickets and the faint scent of honeysuckle. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked softly. "The stagecoach, the gunfire, the storm?" Eli nodded. "Every day. Funny how something so frightening brought us here." "Maybe it had to," he said. "Maybe that was the road that was waiting for us all along." She smiled. "I think you might be right." The sun sank lower, casting a golden glow over the plains. He took her hand, their fingers interlacing easily now, the way roots entwine beneath the soil. "You ever wish things had happened differently?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, if they had, I might never have found you again." The sky deepened into twilight, the first stars flickering above the horizon. The air grew cool, wrapping them in quiet. Clara closed her eyes, breathing in the peace of it all, the sound of the wind, the warmth of his arm around her, the steady beat of his heart. And when she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "You were always where my heart rested, Eli Turner. I just had to find my way back." He kissed her forehead gently, his voice rough with emotion. "And you found me right where you left me." The world faded to stillness as the night came on. The porch light glowed softly, and the sound of the river carried faintly through the distance. Willow Creek lay quiet beneath the stars, a small town with big skies and two hearts that had finally stopped wandering. In the wide silence of the western plains, Eli Turner and Clara Whitmore found what time and distance could never steal, home within each other's hearts. Through storms, dust, and the long roads of fate, their love became a quiet testament that even the roughest journeys can lead to the gentlest endings. Love, after all, doesn't always arrive with thunder. It sometimes comes softly, carried on the wind, and stays for a lifetime. If you enjoyed this tale of redemption, reunion, and timeless love beneath the western sky, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles, where every story brings you deeper into the heart of the frontier, and every sunset holds another unforgettable romance. Saddle up and join us, so you never miss the next story that'll steal your heart.